Hey, what's happening, internets? Welcome to episode 6 of the Sultans and Sneakers podcast. I was really geeked out to do this week's show because I was able to get a conversation with someone whom I've admired from afar for several years, and that individual is Dr. Bart Ehrman. Dr. Ehrman is the James A. Gray Distinguished Professor at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Go Tar Heels! He studied at Moody Bible Institute, Wheaton College, and then went on to obtain his master's in divinity and PhD degrees from Princeton Theological Seminary. He's the author of 30 books, including several New York Times bestsellers, including The Triumph of Christianity, Misquoting Jesus, and How Jesus Became God. He writes daily on his blog, ehrmanblog.org, which one can subscribe to for $25 a year, with all proceeds going to charity. So just to be clear, Dr. Ehrman does not identify as a Christian. He's a self-professed agnostic. He grew up a conservative evangelical Christian, but then began to move away from his faith as his studies progressed. You can find out more about that just by doing a simple Google search. There's probably some YouTube videos where he talks about it if you're interested in how that went down. What I've always found fascinating about Dr. Ehrman is how willing he is to change his mind. It doesn't mean I agree with all his conclusions, but it does point to what we refer to as intellectual honesty. I had a lot of fun chasing him down and making this show happen. So basically, I found out he was going to be speaking at the Defenders Conference at Christ Church in Oak Brook, Illinois. And the Defenders Conference is a Christian apologetics conference. For those of you guys who aren't familiar with that term, it's a forum for Christians to kind of hash out some of their arguments and in helping defend their faith. And I thought it was real interesting that they invited Ehrman, because Ehrman's always, he's been, a critic in that sense of the theology of Christianity now, since he kind of left the faith. And his views obviously aren't in agreement with most, Christian scholars. But I think people do recognize that he's a scholar nonetheless in that field. And they thought, well, he does bring some arguments, then we should be able to engage that. So kudos to the Defenders Conference for making that happen. So long story short, I emailed him about a week before the conference to see if he would be up for a show. He said it sounded interesting. I was like, we can do something in 30 minutes. He was like, well, I don't know if I'll have the time during the conference. Now, another thing I noticed about Dr. Ehrman is a lot of times I've engaged with speakers who are at conferences, and they will kind of just show up for their session, and then they'll go back to their hotel room, or they'll be out hanging out and not really going to the rest of the sessions. They'll be there for only their own sessions. But Dr. Ehrman, he was listening to every speaker, so I could see why he was booked up, because I thought I was under the impression that he was just going to back to his hotel, or he'd go to the lobby or whatnot, but he didn't do that. He sat through all the other sessions, saw him taking notes. So, yeah, he's pretty fully engaged, listening to all the various arguments that the folks were making. So I said, I can drive you to the airport. And I said we might be able to record during that drive. And he seemed open to it, but I was surprised, to be honest, because he doesn't know me from Adam. Keep in mind, I just emailed him like 4 or 5 days before the conference. I could have been a random stranger just trying to ransom him off or something. I'm sure there's like a lot of market value for in the ransom industry for New Testament scholars. But even as an agnostic, he chose to have some faith, and we made it happen, utilizing the time we had, or as it's said in the New Testament in Ephesians 5:16, redeeming the time. My interaction with him didn't just end after the drop-off, though, as I was expecting, because he actually left his phone in my car. I'm driving about 20 minutes from O'Hare Airport, and at the corner of my eye, I see a light flashing, and I'm like, what the heck is that? So ended up pulled over to a Walmart. It's his phone, and I tried to email him real quick. I was like, hey, I can overnight it to you. Actually, then I decided, well, he still has an hour before his flight. Maybe I can make it back to O'Hare and try to get it to him. But security made that impossible. I was at the ticket counter. There was no way to really get him the phone. So went ahead and overnighted it, and he was able to get it before he had to travel to his next destination, I think later in that week, because he was going back to North Carolina, and then he had somewhere else to be after. So, but he was a real treat to work with. Real great guy. May be able to do another show with him in about 6 months or so. So if you like this show and there's stuff you want to see covered in a future episode, definitely let me know. Obviously, in this show, we don't get. 30 minutes is not a lot of time, right? You'd like to have at least an hour for some of these podcasts, but hey, with someone of his stature, I'll take what I can get. So, if you're digging the show, please let your friends and family know about the podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and Pocket Casts. And don't forget to leave a 5-star rating if you're on iTunes. If you got any comments, questions, or concerns, you can reach me at info@sultansandsneakers.com. We're also on Facebook and Instagram at Sultans and Sneakers, and the Twitter handle is Sultans, SULTANSNSNKRS. Finally, if you'd like to support the launch of this new podcast, you can do so financially at www.launchgood.com/Sultans and Sneakers. Enough talk. Let's start the conversation with the one and the only Dr. Bart Ehrman. All right, well, appreciate you coming on.
Yep, my pleasure.
So I wanted to really get your take on debating. So, that's kind of how a lot of folks know about you. You're engaged in these debates from, mostly Christians. But let me ask you this. What's the motive behind debating? Like, why do you see value in it? Like 'cause a lot of folks will say, well, debating just becomes antagonistic and whatnot. How would you respond to that?
Well, the thing is, every time I do one of these debates, just about every time I've done one, it's been with a conservative evangelical Christian on some topic that is highly important to conservative evangelical Christians, such as, are there contradictions in the Bible? Or can you prove that Jesus was really raised from the dead? Or does the problem of suffering show that that God is not in charge of this world, or whatever? These topics, and most of the time I do these debates, they're in front of conservative evangelical audiences, which mean that most of the people are coming in knowing they're not going to agree with me, and so during these debates, I almost always start writing notes to myself, asking, why am I doing this? Because for just that reason, like, is there any point in my doing this? And my view is that one of my goals is to help people think through really complicated issues and to see problems in their personal views. And it's not that I'm certainly never expecting to convince the person I'm debating. That will never, ever happen. And I'm not going to convince most of the people in the audience, and I don't think I'll probably ever convince anybody on the spot in the audience. But what I'm trying to do is to plant some seeds so that people will think about it and over time reflect on the issues and think more deeply about what their views are and what the problems with those views are, and then maybe change their views so that it will make people more thoughtful about what they think.
Planting seeds is a good analogy, because that's kind of, as a practicing Muslim, and I think all are, like, people who practice faiths in general, there's an idea of, especially within Islamic Christianity, that you are proselytizing the faith, right? And so it's like, I can certainly relate to the issue of planting the seed. You talk a lot about in your in some of the debates, when you put that whole preface, you just mentioned that, hey, come here with an open mind and, like, be willing to change your mind, right? Like, if you're going to be intellectually honest. But sometimes, have you found that a lot of people they come from the vantage point where, what you say sounds good, but, like, you're putting your spin on it, and I'm sure there's somebody out there who can refute you, so therefore I'm not going to listen. You understand what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying, and that's right. And so a lot of people really don't want to think through difficult issues. They just want somebody to tell them. And if somebody tells them if somebody confirms what they already are inclined to think, then they take that as confirmation, obviously. And if it's a scholar, then they say, well, I don't really need to think about this because the scholar has said it, and that's a scholar. And so why should I have to think about it? And that happens a lot. But there are some times where you'll get somebody who will start thinking, and you'll realize, actually, what this person was telling me that I thought was right, actually, maybe it's not right. And so that's what I really strive for, is that kind of person, that kind of audience.
I got you. So, like, now, to do the work you do and your kind of research, and I kind of figured, I think one of the first debates I watched of you had a debate with Dr. James White. I think it was about, like, preservation of the Bible. You'll probably remember, but I remember I was taking notes, and a lot of stuff was going over my head because you're talking about, like, various codexes and, like, the Greek and, whatnot, where it's almost like you need a background in the language to understand what's going on.
Well, that's true at some level. I mean, I can't remember. I mean, we were debating about whether we are certain about what the authors of the New Testament originally wrote. And I think we probably have a pretty good idea, but I don't think we can be certain. And I think the kind of knowledge that he needs as a fundamentalist isn't the kind of knowledge that's available to us. And it did make us to go down in the weeds a little bit. But a lot of the things I was trying to say, I meant to be accessible to people who are not scholars. They're just some basic factual information. The problem is when you give out factual information, the other person wants to refute you. He feels like he's got to go deeper. And then to respond to him, you've got to go deeper. And then pretty soon you're too deep for anybody. So that is definitely a problem with a debate like that, dealing with Greek manuscripts.
Well, the other issue I think is with debates that people would critique is, let's say, in the course of the debate that your opponent feels like you're actually right, but you're in a church and he doesn't want to, like, appear to be the one losing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So he's not going to, even if he believes your argument is stronger, he's not going to go ahead and, like, concede that because he's got to save face.
I think that's right. And I was actually thinking about that today in light of this conference we just did on contradictions in the New Testament. I was thinking about some of the people who were involved with the conference. And I was actually a little bit saddened that, there are people, it's not just like on the spot they can't agree. There are people whose careers and their livelihoods are dependent on them having certain religious views. They might be in a ministry of some kind. They might be a pastor of a church, or they might be writing books, and they might be asked around to giving lectures and things. And if they seriously change their views, they would lose their livelihood, and they would lose their social environments, and I realize it's such pressure for them actually not to be really open because they just can't afford to be. I'm in kind of a luxurious situation because I can change my mind about anything. I mean, I could become a fundamentalist Christian, and that'd be fine. I mean, I'd make a ton of money if I would do that. Write a book. Maybe so many people would want the book. So it's like nothing like that is affecting me, but some people are in a situation where they really are affected.
All right. I mean, I think that's so do you guys, now, let's say some of the people that you debate on the debate stage, how often are you guys conversing, like, behind the scenes and discussing issues through?
Almost never.
Never. Okay.
So, like, at this conference we just did, Mike Lacona was there, and Mike and I have probably had 3 or 4 debates, and we never, like, email each other or chat on the phone or anything like that, or we'll occasionally see each other at a conference and talk for 5 minutes, but usually just kind of small talk. So I don't really have these discussions with people outside of that particular context.
I see. So, like, again, going back to it, the benefit is really for the audience to try to understand, because I think, like, let's say, like, that panel wasn't meant to be a debate, but it kind of, turned on. It felt like a classic Ehrman-Lacona debate in some ways, right?
Yeah.
The back and forth, because, like, the other gentlemen necessarily weren't as, but, like, when you're talking about, the issue of the genealogy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It just seems like there's this position he's got to, like, take. But it's almost like if we can't agree on definitions, then if we define things the way we want, how do you even, like, what's the point of that? Because, like, we can define, you can define something on your terms, he'll define something on his terms. It's like, well, and you probably agree with him on his definition, but I'm like, I don't agree with your definition.
Well, so like in this particular debate, it wasn't supposed to be, you're right. But the disagreement, Mike was willing to say that Matthew is wrong about this particular point. And it could be a big point, like his genealogy of Jesus is wrong. And then he says, and it's reliable. And so, it's kind of a definitional problem, but it seems like a strange definition to me to say that something's historically wrong and historically reliable. And so if you define reliability in that way, then okay, fine. But that just means that, and what's the point? I mean, so I'm not interested in debating like the definition of what reliability is. I'm interested in knowing, if you read the Gospels, are they telling you what happened in the way they happened or not? And so, whatever you want to call that. And so the funny thing was that he and even Craig Keener agreed that there are differences and contradictions and mistakes, and yet they want to then somehow still say, yes, but they are reliable.
This is a side question, not really to debate. We can could decide if you want, but the idea of, so one thing that's really interesting to me as a Muslim, and and one thing it took me a hard time to understand was the difference between the Quran and the Bible or the New Testament are very different kinds of scriptures. Because for us, the Quran, we consider it to be, there's this just chain of narration and transmission, and it's versus where when I talk to a Christian about it, it's it's kind of the gist of it is the message is the most important thing. We're not concerned about a couple words here, these are details that doesn't really concern us. The overall message is this is what it's about, and we know that. And when you have some Christians, they'll say, Christianity is not a monolith, but for example, someone would tell me, well, the idea is that there was a man named Jesus who walked on water, and he was crucified, and he was resurrected. And if that guy did that, then I'm going to follow him. And then the scriptural behind it, that supports it, generally speaking, and I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Do you think that's a fair representation?
I don't think that as you were saying, I don't think Christianity is a monolith.
Yeah.
I think what you're describing is one form of Christianity.
Okay.
And I think a lot more people who identify with evangelical Christianity are starting to adopt that kind of looser approach to Scripture.
Okay. And
the reason is because, they're learning from other scholars that, in fact, there are mistakes and they're having to admit it because they are there. And so, but there are other Christians who don't even put that much weight on the Bible, and there are Christians who put far more weight on the Bible, and there are Christians who say, no, there are no mistakes of any kind. And I would say that kind of Christian is more like traditional Islam's attitude toward the Quran. There just aren't any mistakes in it. And with the Quran, of course, you can argue that there never have been mistakes because the scribe never changed the thing. And Christians can't argue that because obviously scribes were changing the New Testament all the time. But the idea that the original was actually given by God is something that of a lot of fundamentalist Christians still hold to.
Yeah, I think to wrap up this point here, I think is because when I was telling some of my friends that I'm going to a gospel conference, and they're talking about and they're like, well, just tell them that man wrote it. I'm like, that by definition, the Gospels are written by men, right? Yeah. Because for us, it's the worldview of the Quran is almost like a different, what's the whole thing? Ipsissima vox, ipsissima verb, literal, there's one that's kind of a general meaning, and then
ipsissima vox, I mean, kind of the gist is right. Ipsissima verba means you get the exact words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think it seems like a lot of, the New Testament was more of it's a general vibe thing, and then maybe if Jesus did say something, that's the exact words of Christ. Well, some Christians would say that, right?
Yeah. And some Christians say every word is exact, and those, but those are always the fundamentalists. They're not people who are what the rest of the world would consider to be scholars. They're it's a faith commitment.
Sure. Now back to the whole issue of debating. Do you remember the first time you did a debate?
Well, my first debate was when I was a sophomore in high school.
I was not thinking you must have been in a debate club or something.
I was a state debate champion
in
high school.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I always have loved debate.
Okay.
And public speaking and all that kind of. I've done that since I was 14. But I don't know what my first formal debate was in terms of as a scholar.
Okay.
I don't even know what that would have been.
Do you ever recall debating as a Christian?
I didn't do formal debates on a stage.
Okay.
I had lots of debates with people because I was an apologist and
Right.
I was trying to defend the faith. And so I had lots of debates, but nothing of a formal nature that I can think of.
So what's the how's the process work? Let's say somebody wants. Let's say I want you to come in and debate. I don't know. Who's someone you know? Omid Safi. You know Omid Safi?
Yeah,
He's at Duke.
I hired him at UNC.
Really?
Yeah, I was the chair. Yeah, that's how he got to Chapel Hill before he went to Duke.
I was just thinking of a Muslim guy you might know, and I was like, oh, I just threw it out there.
Yeah.
Let's say I want to invite you to Chicago to like debate Omid Safi. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, how do you assess? Like, first of all, if you're gonna agree to it, the subject matter, all that stuff. What goes on there?
Okay, so what happens is somebody contacts me, and it's the same as if somebody wants me to give a lecture someplace, a speech. It's the same process. I get a number of invitations, and I have to choose which ones I do. And when it comes to debates, it has to do with what the topic is and who the person is that I'm asked to debate. So there are some people I will just never debate because I don't think they're nice human beings, and they don't have a sense of humor, and they're mean. And it's like I don't need to be on the stage with some malicious guys just being a pain in the neck. And so I just don't do those. But then, if I'm inclined, then I tell them, well, okay, so I have a speaker's fee, and this is what my fee is, and, these are the terms that I could do it under, and these are the dates possibly we could. And so if you can work out the date and you work out the terms, then you kind of move forward. So it's a process of negotiation, just like it would be for, getting somebody in to give a lecture.
I got you. Now, so you mentioned there's people you will debate, some you won't. Do you get those moments where you think someone's gonna be a nice guy? Like, have you been in those debates where you were like, well, I was wrong about him, I'm never gonna debate him again?
Yes.
That how often would you say that happens? Is that a frequent thing or
no? So I did feel that way about James White. I thought that he wasn't very respectful and had kind of a mean streak to him. I debated a guy down in Alabama who, what was his name? His last name was Butts, B-U-T-T-S, or B-U-T-T maybe, Butt. And he was more kind of a hardcore evangelical. I doubt if he'd call himself a fundamentalist, but I think he's a fundamentalist. The problem with the term fundamentalism in Christianity is that nobody thinks they're a fundamentalist. The fundamentalist is always the guy who's to the right of you. Right. He's more conservative than you are. But this guy's pretty much a fundamentalist. And he wasn't pleasant. And he kind of... So it happens sometimes. Usually the people I debate are people I already know. And so I think, okay, yeah, that'll be fine.
So when you're doing your homework, getting ready for the debate, like, do you have a specific time frame that is it like getting ready for these MMA fighters? They schedule, you need like X amount of heads up. Like, is there a minimum time frame you request before the debate to get ready for it?
I usually don't, because usually in my case, when I get asked to debate something, it's something that I really know inside out already. Okay. So I don't do any research or anything. And Mike Licona, our first debate. He was published in Christianity Today. I forget the exact thing he said, but I think he said he spent... This can't be right. I thought he said he spent 5,000 hours getting ready. It must be 500 hours. Okay. 500 hours getting ready for that debate.
Right. I
spent about an hour and a half.
Okay.
Because we're talking about like stuff that I teach all the time. So what am I going to... I mean, this is what I do for a living.
Yeah.
and so like this thing on the contradictions, one of the other speakers, I won't say which, indicated that he was up till 4 a.m. working on his presentation, and I think, really, I put mine together like in an hour. So
because you've probably done it because I think I've heard variants of this topic from you, like probably. I mean, it's either, like 95%, like pretty much all of it pretty much is there in your books.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, so what are you going to learn? I mean, if you're a New Testament scholar, like I've been studying the New Testament for 50 years. Do I have to read the New Testament again to know what's in it? So, yeah.
But what about the angle? Let's take Dr. Mike Licona, for example, right? He's written these books. I would assume that you would have read his books to understand his angle, so you can deconstruct it. That's not the case?
Sometimes it is. It depends. I mean, I will definitely look around in the book and kind of see but you don't have to read every word of a book to know what the person's argument's going to be. And so it's pretty easy to get a sense for what somebody's position is and to realize how you need to attack it. So, there's only so many ways that you can defend the consistency of the Gospels or defend whether you can prove the resurrection or not. There are not really very many. There are a few. And so you just figure out how this person's doing it, and you know about that. So you go ahead from there.
Okay, that makes sense. Because I would think that if for some reason I had to debate somebody, the first thing I would do was look at their debates on YouTube.
Oh yeah, I never do that.
You never do. Okay,
never do that because I don't have time. I mean, the thing is, I have so many other commitments that, and I'm not really worried about it because I really know what I think and I know why I think it. And I know what the other views are. I mean, this is because this is what I do for a living, and so I think the only time I've watched a YouTube debate with somebody that I debated was one year. I was at a friend's house, and he wanted me to watch a debate between Dinesh D'Souza and Christopher Hitchens. And I had heard of Hitchens, but I had never heard of Dinesh D'Souza, and it was about the virtue of Christianity, whether it's a valuable thing or not. And I was really impressed with Dinesh D'Souza. I thought, man, this guy's smart, and he's quick, and that's interesting. So about 3 years later, somebody tried to arrange a debate with me and Dinesh D'Souza. And we had this debate. And in fact, we ended up having 3 debates, all of them on the same topic about whether suffering is a problem for people who believe in God. The problem of suffering. How do you explain suffering in the world if there's a God who's in control of it? And he thinks that there's not a big problem, and he has explanations, and I think it is a big problem, and the explanations are not satisfying. And so I had seen him debate, and so the only benefit of that debate for me was I realized this guy's a really good debater, and I'm probably going to get creamed here. And so, but he wasn't debating about the same topic. And so I was really nervous since I realized how smart it was that he was going to come up with something I'd never thought of before. But it turns out he hadn't.
Okay.
And so it's perfectly fine. And so it's fine. Yeah.
But he's not like a scholar of Christianity. He's like a political science policy guy, right?
He is, but he's written a couple books on Christianity. He wrote a very prominent book called What is Great About Christianity.
Okay.
And he's an evangelical Christian who is the president of an evangelical Christian college. And so even though he's really more political than and that's kind of what came out in these debates. He isn't really an expert in religion, but he also wrote a book on the afterlife. And so, I mean, he's done things like that.
Oh, you just thought it was it's I used to be a conservative Republican in my past life in some ways. I was like the only Muslim guy working the phone booth for Bush Cheney.
Wow.
In Ohio, right? Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But,
yeah, well.
And so I was familiar with his work because I was growing up, Reagan was the man.
Yeah.
And so, Dinesh D'Souza was definitely, that's why that name came. And it's really funny because on a side note, my mom was asking me, hey, do you know this guy? Because she had come across his book somehow. I think I had bought a book from the library and left it there, and she read it. She's like, "Oh, this guy's really interesting." She agreed with all of his stuff. He was talking about basically conservatives.
Yeah.
I was we didn't talk too much. I think she breezed a little bit through it. She's like, "Hey, this is a great book."
Yeah.
But in a side note, yeah.
Well, it was funny because after this debate, there was a little cocktail party for us and for friends and family and stuff. So 20 or 30 people there, and I'm just drinking my glass of wine, talking to somebody. I see my wife, who's also a scholar, and she's cornered Dinesh D'Souza, and she's nailing him on politics. She's just going after him. And so here we go, because my wife is very articulate and really smart. And so then about 20 minutes later, I see my son going after him. And so neither one of them is conservative at all. And so they were both so first he and I had a debate, then he had my wife and son to go after him. So,
final question before we wrap up: is there any subject in Christianity that you would not? Because one thing I've noticed is that you've never done a debate on the Trinity, for instance.
I would be happy to debate where the idea of the Trinity came from. The only debates I get asked to do sometimes that I won't do are debates comparing doing a comparative debate between either the Quran and the New Testament or the comparable values or truth claims of Islam and Christianity. And the reason I don't do that is because I'm not an expert in, I only debate on things that I'm an expert in. And the world does not need to hear me talk about Islam or the Quran because I'm not an expert. And I don't believe in, as a public intellectual figure, I don't believe in going public with things I'm not an intellectual authority on. So I think those are the only things connected with Christianity that I've never would be disinclined to debate on. But anything else, I think probably.
Even a philosophical debate about the Trinity versus not like because there's obviously because you always say you're like a historian, right?
Yeah. So I'm not going to debate theology because I don't have a theology. So I'm not going to debate whether it's right or not. But I would be willing to debate, for example, whether the Trinity is in the New Testament.
Okay. By the way, what airlines are you flying?
I am flying American.
American. Okay. We're pretty close. So yeah. Any last plug? Actually, real quick. I've always found it interesting that even after you left Christianity, that you're like so in love with the New Testament. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, my wife is in love with Shakespeare, but she doesn't believe in him.
Right.
And so lots of people, I have friends who teach Plato, but they're not Platonists,
Right.
I have people who teach Marx, but they're not communists. It's like, you don't have to be, so it's like that with the religion. We have people in my department who teach Buddhism, but they're not Buddhists, and Judaism who aren't Jews, and so it's like that with the Bible for me. It's like my passion because I think it's so important historically and culturally, socially. It's really, really important, and so I'm interested in it. But it's not something I personally believe in.
Sure. And if people want to support the work you're doing, where can they go to do so?
So what I try to get the word out about is my blog, which you know about.
Right.
So the Bart Ehrman blog is an endeavor I've been doing for 7 years now. I post 5 times a week, about 1,200 words a day, 5 times a week, on issues, anything having to do with the New Testament, the historical Jesus, the Apostle Paul, the 2nd century Christianity, up through the history of Christianity in the first 4 centuries, or related issues like early Judaism or the Hebrew Bible, Greco-Roman religions. And so like a wide range of things. I answer everybody's question. People can comment on my posts, and if they ask questions, I answer them. I do this every day almost. And so people to belong to the blog have to pay a membership fee, and I give the entire fee away to charities dealing with hunger and homelessness. So I'd like people to know about that and look at it at least, and think about joining.
All right. Well, Dr. Ehrman, I appreciate you coming on. I hope people could benefit from this little exchange we had. Listeners, it's something unique. I don't think I've ever done a podcast while driving someone to the airport, but hey, you got to take what you got to get, right? I mean,
yeah.
I'm
So sorry. Yeah, I wish I had more time.
I mean, like some people call you, like some people would argue that I don't want to toot your, I hope you can get your head through the gate, but I mean, some people would say you're the foremost New Testament scholar in the world, almost. I mean, I've heard that before. Yeah. I mean, from people even who disagree with you theologically. Yeah. So you really appreciate taking the time and for engaging with the Defenders Conference, who were that's where I don't know if we were the only non-Christians there, but maybe there's a couple here and there.
I think there were a couple of others.
Okay.
So that was but it was a very receptive crowd, and I really appreciated it because they do all disagree with me religiously, but they also were generous and wanted to hear what I had to say, and so that was good. I wish there were more people like that who have very firm beliefs who are willing to listen to someone else.
Very good. All right, we'll wrap this one up, and then talk to you guys later. Take care.